Welcome to the Dr. Dad's podcast, where a naturopath and chiropractor come together each week to share lifestyle medicine, health advice, and inspiring interviews with some of the top experts in health and wellness, bringing you the latest in nutrition, exercise, ancient healing, toxins and detox, your microbiome, mindset, hormones, brain, and much more. Stay tuned. We're going to teach you how to experience growth daily.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Dad's podcast. My co-host and partner in crime is MIA at the moment. I think he'll be jumping in just a few moments, but we're going to get started nonetheless because we've got a really important episode to discuss today. You've heard us talk a lot about, detoxification, optimization, biohacking, just global inflammation, the nervous system and all this stuff. And I think that, we haven't had a chance to really dive into traumatic brain injury in the way that we've needed to. And obviously, as you guys know, if you've been following the podcast, you know that my mom suffered a traumatic brain injury about 7 years ago now. And I've been doing all I can to research and find more details. And it's just funny how you stumble across amazing people on the journey. And so we've got a very special guest for you guys today. His name is Dr. Mark Gordon. And he's got a huge bio here, but I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights. So Dr. Mark Gordon was board certified in family medicine in 1984. He continued his medical education in clinical orthopedics, in dermatology, sports medicine, before writing his first book in 2007. We're going to fast forward a little bit here. He's been on HBO, ESPN, CNN, Fox, Good Morning America, the Joe Rogan Experience. This gentleman has been everywhere, shouting from the mountaintops that there is a way to heal and overcome from traumatic brain injury, because in the world that we live in, the world that we've been indoctrinated in, is one that tells us that we cannot ever recover. The brain does not heal. And he's on a mission to change that narrative. And so Dr. Mark Gordon, thank you so much for being with us today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nick. And thanks for keeping that bio short. I mean, you almost had me sleeping.
Right. It's an honor to be able to speak with people who have been, in the field for such a long time. I'm 10 years into my practice and I feel like I know nothing, and I feel like I've accumulated a lot of hours studying, but it's conversations like we're about to have and the things that you've shared. I got to say too, one more plug. If you haven't yet checked out the documentary that Dr. Mark Gordon's a big part of, it's really an illuminating experience for people to understand the full scope of how many people are actually dealing with this chronic brain inflammation. And it's called Quiet Explosions. So make sure you check that out. So Mark, we got so much stuff to talk about. Why don't we talk a little bit about, sort of a trajectory of the people that you've seen and why you've decided to hone in so specifically on this niche?
It goes way back to my own occurrence. You were talking about a personal situation in your sphere where it influenced you to start looking at this area. Well, when I was in my 40s, I started developing depression. And the depression needed medication. I still on medication, didn't feel well. I was gaining weight. I just wasn't a happy camper. I had a busy practice in family practice at that time, where I was doing some work in anti-aging medicine, which was started in the United States in about 1993. So in about 95, started looking into hormones. And then 97, when I was on antidepressants, in my reading, I came across this suggestion that traumatic brain injury of whatever kind was associated with influencing hormones in the brain. Obviously, the control center, the pituitary, regulates the hormones throughout our body. So I went and had blood work done, and lo and behold, I was 3 hormones down: growth hormone, testosterone, and thyroid. And within 90 days of starting on a replenishment program, my whole world started to return to normal. Was in martial arts, in the gym, playing guitar, doing a lot more. And then jump ahead to about 2004, I was asked to write a new lecture on neuropathology and hormones, the brain and hormones. And the first article I read was out of Turkey, talking about people with trauma in pugilism and boxing. And they had a specific growth hormone deficiency. And that was my aha. Epiphany article, which sent me out looking for the other questions. What other hormones are involved? And found a whole litany of articles talking about other hormones. And so trauma causes hormone deficiency. And at the same time, we were starting to see that selective hormone deficiencies are associated with depression, obsessive compulsive, panic attack, agoraphobia, suicide ideation, lack of libido, just all these things. So there was then a third phase, which, there was the trauma, the hormone deficiency, and then influence on our neurobehavior, our personality. And then that led into cognitive impairment. So as I'm reading this, my abilities, cognitive abilities on therapy were getting better and better and better. My memory was better and better. I'm now 68 and I've got this almost ironclad kind of memory where I can read, 5 to 10 articles every week and select one for our journal club on Sundays, where I release it at 1:00 in the morning and I give a little dissertation on the article to help people through it. So I'm still moving forward. We have a lot of projects with the military is what I am personally involved in. And how I got involved in that was from my first book in 2007, Clinical Application of Interventional Endocrinology, which is the term I used instead of anti-aging medicine, because I used to get a lot of flack from my academic colleagues. Gordon, you used to be so good at what you do. What's this crap you're now dealing with? This is this pseudo-science that you're in. But it wasn't. There was no pseudo with it because the science had been developed. They didn't read it.
Yeah.
So my plight right now is to make sure that my colleagues read the cutting edge science that's out there 30 years before they actually get it in one of the, throwaway journal articles, that we're supposed to keep, but I throw them away. But anyway, so writing the book, I started giving classes in 2007. And one of the individuals was a emergency room doc whose husband was a Green Beret in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, who calls me one day and says her husband's in trouble. Can I help? So I sent her a kit. He was the first individual that I sent a paid for kit, and we found his deficiencies. And she, being a doc, was able to get him replenished in the hormones, and he just flipped around being great. And about that same time, I had started working with the NFL back in the late 90s. And, I was there at the retirement, the NFL retirement group. They all had symptomatology of CTE, which is the same thing as traumatic brain injury. It's all the same stuff as we talked about earlier. It's neuroinflammation and physical damage to the brain tissue. So they wanted me to do things in a way that I didn't really feel comfortable doing. So I said, I might as well go and do it for someone who really will benefit from it. And that's when I started with the military. And 2009 was the first case. And then in 2015, I was looking for a charitable organization owned and operated by the military, by a veteran. And that ended up being Andrew Marr, who was Green Beret, who had blast trauma, who was knocked out of commission within 3 to 4 months on 13 medications, full-blown alcoholic and suicidal. And he was reaching for an alternative doctor while I was reaching for a veteran organization. We met in the cloud and ended up communicating. He drives up from San Diego, and we get him blood tested and treated immediately. And he has this revelation of improvement. And since then, in 2015, we've been working together, he with his Warrior Angel Foundation out of Texas, and me with the Millennium Health Centers. And we collaborate a lot on doing projects for the Marines, for Green Beret, for the SEALs, for Rangers. We go to different military bases and give lectures. Or in 2016, we were guests of President Bush at his house down in South Texas. And we're able to talk to, some of the veterans who were there with injuries. And it's just continued with, Joe Rogan had been a great supporter, and now you're a great supporter. And we have other people, Mike Maller, The NBC, the CBS, and all the programs that we get involved with have been great foundations or platforms for us to disseminate the information. And the information that we want to disseminate is, as you started by saying, hope. We now offer an alternative hope for people with traumatic brain injury or PTSD, if you will, or depression, anxiety, bipolar, obsessive compulsive, or any of those labeled conditions, which if you go back and look deep enough, they all stemmed from one form of another of a singular or multiple trauma. And emotional trauma, stress, can be a trauma. It's a non-physical. We talk about and think about traumas as being physical. Mm-hmm. Well, we have both traumatic, physical, traumatic brain injury, and non-traumatic. What are some of the non-traumatic? Certain medication, chronic stress, living in a stressful environment, having your life threatened, sexual abuse, surgery can cause that. So we've had people with prolonged surgical procedures develop depression or personality changes, and that's because of cortisol, stress hormone, because of loss of testosterone, because of loss of thyroid hormone, which all occur from the stress.
Yeah. No, I mean, not to mention 2020 and 2021. Right.
Oh, yeah. We saw a spike. A lot of our guys, 459 of them, the majority of them slid backwards because they were watching the news. They were, the crazy news, whether it was political or political science. That's what we're now seeing is a lot of political science, not science, but political science, So that is a stressor. And how I treated these guys was not by changing anything we were doing biochemically or medically for them. We told them, turn off the radio, turn off the television, change the channel. Mm-hmm. Better you watch a poor movie than watch the news.
Yeah.
And they saw, oh my God, I'm feeling better. I'm not watching the news. Stop reading the newspaper. Oh, I'm feeling better. And guess what? I got caught in that because my normal routine is reading some 15 to 20 articles every morning before COVID, before any of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, all the articles I'd read about a stripper who got, in a car accident and had problems here and so forth, where it was all about political science and COVID.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad you're bringing attention to the emotional impact mm-hmm. that it has on brain inflammation. I think, there's numbers that were recorded in the documentary is some 20 some odd million Americans per year, multiply that by, years, you multiply that by a pandemic, and right. we've got a whole lot more brain trauma than I think that we realize. So can you talk just about the sheer scope of those numbers?
Well, in one of the presentations, in fact, that Andrew Marr did, he brought up the fact that there are 47 million Americans who are on one form or another of an antidepressant. Right. But there are 2.1 to 2.3, depending upon who you read, traumatic brain injuries every year. And within that group, about 156,000 die. I think it's 56 or 156,000 die. And, 380,000 end up in an emergency room. And then you see the 48% of them end up having, it's called a axis 1 or axis 2 psychiatric condition, depression, psychoses. What is it? The other is withdrawal, paranoia, psychoses, depression, drug addiction. Okay, in this list, 48% of the people develop it, and it's a 30-year study that came out. Wow. So we, because in our literature, it says that after you have a head trauma, it could take 17 years for the symptoms to really pop up. So let's say 5 years after you have a head trauma, automobile accident, you start feeling fatigued, your libido's off, you're cognitively impaired, you're socially withdrawn. You go to a doc, and what does he do? Oh, you're depressed. Here's an antidepressant. Do they ask, did you have a car accident? Or did you have a slip and fall? Or were you assaulted? Or did you, stand up and bang your head against something? And one of the fallacies is that you need to have loss of consciousness, which you don't. All you need to do is have a multitude of small insults. It's like the analogy I use is you can either have 10 dimes, Canadian dimes, or $1 Canadian. They both equal 100. So you can have 10 small events or one major event with loss of consciousness. And then the use of CT scan and MRI scans to look at the brain to find these insults to the brain from whatever you did, they actually found that in people who had loss of consciousness, head trauma with loss of consciousness, 85% of them had no findings on CT and MRI.
Wow.
No findings, CT and MRI. Why? Because the head traumas initiate inflammation. And it's the inflammation that alters natural, normal, healthy biochemistry of the brain that allows us to be who you and I present to be in this conversation, you know? And therefore, if you're high in inflammation, the chemistry that regulates my ability to recall things is diminished. Or the one that keeps me without depression, isolation, or feeling sad all the time now kicks in and I feel sad. Or cognitively, for doing high order mathematics, remembering pi 3.1478938, whatever it is, out to 14 places, you can't remember it because your cognition is impaired. People not being able to read, people not being able to understand spoken language.
Yeah, and it hits the point home. Like we see Andrew Marr going through his journey on the documentary, and we think that, man, that's not me. There's no way that's me. I have these symptoms as a result of something else.
Right.
And what you're speaking to, though, is probably the majority of people that actually go to see doctors with these, endocrine disruptions, the chronic pain, the chronic fatigue, the mental emotional instability, the relationship issues, the addictions you spoke to. The reality is that, we've all had some form or another of head trauma. I mean, my two young boys, they're falling all the time. And I mean, the amount of bonks they've got on their heads. I mean, we know that those little, like you said, those little dimes add up to dollars, and those dollars add up to larger bills over time. And And the fact that you're bringing attention to this is so important. And I love that you even brought in with regards to the CT scans, not showing, this acute trauma, even right after a blow. So, I mean, where do people go from here? I mean, we know that there's some problems, maybe they remember history, maybe they don't, but all the symptoms are there. I mean, you take people through a battery of tests to find out these inflammatory markers. What happens next after you take a little bit of a history taking?
They fill out a 23-page document, which includes history of minor, insignificant injuries. Also any psychological complaints, also any physical, because you mentioned something that's missed a lot, is that when you have inflammation of the brain, it creates a chemical called peroxynitrite that sort of like puts you fingernails scratching down the chalkboard so that your brain is irritable. So you fly off the handle, your irritable responses, as well as it's irritable towards pain. So it magnifies pain. And one of the articles that I sent around a month ago, if not a little longer, was talking about this traumatic brain injury, peroxynitrite, and hypersensitivity, minor injuries. And it's like someone chopped your hand off or someone beat you up with a baseball bat, a Louisville Slugger to be specific. Okay. Anyway, the change in the chemistry creates inflammation. Inflammation disrupts the hormones in the brain. We do a blood test, 28 markers. We process through a program called the Millennium Office Assistant, which is a expert AI system that interrelates and analyzes the lab results and produces a report which gives us the interpretation of the lab results relative to the influence of trauma and where the trauma is, hypothalamus, pituitary, or the end organ, the gonads, or the adrenals, or where have you. And then it gives you a suggestion of treatment protocols. So our treatments do not use, for the majority, any kind of pharmaceutical products. Some of the pharmaceuticals that we might use are thyroid or a medication called clomiphene citrate, which stimulates your brain to produce its own testosterone. And one of the things that we've totally veered away from is the use of injectable testosterone in anyone that is, less than 40 years of age. And the reason being is we don't want to replace your body's ability to make the hormones. We want to improve the body's ability, the brain's ability to make the hormones so that you can get off treatment. If we put a person onto injectable testosterone, there's a great possibility that they're going to be committed to testosterone for the rest of their life. And if you start young, like I've seen, some docs putting 21-year-olds, 19-year-olds on injectable testosterone, which is horribly wrong because it'll diminish their ability for their own production, diminish their ability for sperm production and fertility. So it hinders their fertility. So we use clomiphene citrate, which we have over 700 people on it, and it's doing well. I mean, I ended up getting on the clomiphene after we did a 3-year veteran study back in 2014. The results were too good to ignore it. So after 17 years sticking a needle in my leg, it was time to get off it. And this is what's kept me going is the Clomid. And it's worked very well. We have a lot of people who, oh, no, we would rather have injectable. I said, let's start with the Clomid. And if it doesn't work, we'll go to injectable. Very rarely do we need to go on to injectable. But I do have a program that after they've proven that Clomid works well, if they want to go on injectable to see if the combination of Clomid and testosterone called our hybrid protocol works better for them, we try it out. I mean, I'm not blocking anything. Let's see that which works the best for you, ends the safest. That's the key. Safe. We try to get the brain back functioning on its own. Stop the inflammation and give it a little bit of support until that inflammation is gone.
Yeah. On the topic of prescriptions, have you found any success in using HCG as a stimulus?
I haven't found HCG in the traditional use of either 250 or 500 3 times a week works very well. Also, it's an injectable. Clomiphene citrate's a tablet, and you take it every 3rd day. Wow. The 3-year study that we did was to determine what the lowest possible dose and what the greatest frequency timing could be. We have 11 guys that take 1 or 2 tablets a week and get levels like someone taking it every day. They just have an incredible system. And how would you know that they're that unique if you didn't watch, if you didn't try it out?
Wow. So understanding that this perpetual chronic state of inflammation is just constantly getting reactivated. So a lot of people, that are playing these sports, they're in high risk, situations. I mean, essentially, you'd like to talk to them all before, as far as a preparation would go, so that the recovery is more effective. Can you speak a little bit about just this, like low-grade inflammation and how important preparation and prevention is?
Right. Well, that fits into the discussion called biological resiliency. In biological resiliency, it begs the question that I see quite often. You've got a group of guys who are exposed to an IED. Why is it that this person has worse response than this person who has none? Why? What's the difference? Well, some of the differences are nutrition. In a nutrition that has things like fish oil or alpha tocopherol, or that have zinc, or that have molybdenum, things that are protective for inflammation, that quell drop inflammation. Zinc, very important. Magnesium, molybdenum, in the SODs, in the superoxide dismutase, in these inflammatory systems. Glutathione, very important. N-acetylcysteine, very important. And alcohol, a lifestyle. Alcohol, not good because it destroys a lot of that stuff. Alcohol generates inflammation in the brain. I had a case this morning, military, who basically said they, on their own volition, stopped drinking alcohol. And all of a sudden, their sleep improved, their migraines diminished, they weren't gaining weight, they were happier, but they still had issues because they still had hormones that were deficient. But alcohol is a no-no in traumatic brain. So in the people who have had since they were born, the first trauma is delivery. Then the next group of traumas are when they're learning how to walk up to 1 year of age. Most children learn how to walk by 13 months, I think it is. And then after learning how to walk, what do you do next? Bicycle? skateboard, Whistler for
Some snowboarding
yeah. Or other places for cross country, or tobogganing, and or moguls, and that repetitive banging will cause you to have it. Water surfing, water skiing, surfing, like you saw Sean Dollar on the program.
Yeah.
He's doing so great, so great. And now he's helping us with our military. It was so great, so great. So it's about proactive nature. And you, in your realm of naturopathic, you've got all the tools. That's where I learned it. My daughter is naturopath. I learned a lot of the tools in your ballywhack of treatment.
Yeah, I loved hearing that. I mean, what an eclectic family you've got, the naturopath, and then your other daughters. They're in medicine, I guess.
Yeah. One's internist, who now is frontline internist and hospitalist. Erin is moving into aesthetic medicine. She's now moved into my office to do aesthetics. She's been training for 3 years as a sideline to do it, because she saw the hospital is, the hospital. Anyway, so what people need to look at is their lifestyle, eating well, good hydration, exercise. Exercise generates endorphins and enkephalins, which are protective of the brain for anti-inflammation. Sleeping well. When you sleep, melatonin, anti-inflammatory, increases growth hormone. Growth hormone increases melatonin, drops cancer, melatonin. So taking melatonin. So, and the laboratory testing, which we have, as I shared with you earlier, we have a group of naturopathic docs that have come down to take our training that are in the East Coast, Mid, and West Coast. More in the West Coast. Obviously, more
mountains over here.
More mountains. Okay.
We need it more. Yeah, and I look forward to going down and visiting you and taking that training as well. I mean, it's such important work that you do.
Please do. I mean, what we're trying to do is get the numbers of exposed individuals up there, as we're doing right now, is really exposing your listeners, as well as there's probably some healthcare professionals within that listening group, whether or not it's a nurse or a naturopath or a PA or an MD, or you don't have DOs in Canada, right?
We do, actually, yeah.
You do?
They have a different scope of practice, I think, than in the US, but they're here.
Yeah, US, same as MD.
Yeah. That's not the case here.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, there's a little bit more of a overbearing restriction up here, up north. So we talked about bowel resiliency. I love that that term. I think that's so important for people to understand why it's so important to just be have preparedness and be proactive in your health approach anyways, but especially if you are exposing yourself to some of these more extreme conditions. I mean, not everyone's going to be a pro surfer riding maverick waves like Sean does, but I mean, some of us, we're in these regular, our regular lives, have these little micro traumas, and we have this brain inflammation. So let's talk a little bit about the pathophysiology. So we've got this whole immune network that, for whatever reason, was only recently discovered in the last number of years, or talked about, or what have you. But
yes,
it's this whole lymphatic system. Can you talk about how this perpetual torment can show up in some of the cellular makeup?
Yeah, we have a unique cell in the brain called microglia. They're like white blood cells that are circulating around the body, but they're restricted into the brain. Now, the microglia are usually in a sleeping or a quiescent state until something happens. Something like a virus comes in, something like a bacteria or a mold comes in, or a chemical that causes disruption in the quietness of the brain, or trauma. When you have trauma, you have micro tears. So you have bleeding, you have loss of axon chemistry, you have mitochondria dumping, you have necrosis, you have all these chemical processes that dump into a healthy system. Someone's got to respond. So these white blood cells respond by trying to clean up the mess that was just precipitated by one of those events. And in the process of doing that, they release immune chemistry called cytokines or chemokines, interleukins, and these chemicals are inflammatory at the beginning. We have an acute phase and a chronic phase. In the acute phase, what happens is you're exposed to a virus, common cold. Your body produces the cytokines, which creates inflammation, and that's where you feel cognitively impaired when you've got a cold, or foggy in the brain, or irritable. This is all from these interleukins, interleukin 1, 1b, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha. And when the virus is eradicated by this activation of inflammation to kill it, and the white blood cells gobble it up and get rid of it, it goes back to what they call phase 2, which is anti-inflammation. So you go from a quiet to an inflammation to an anti-inflammatory state. And during anti-inflammation, the interleukins like 10 that quiet the brain down allow you to go from an acute inflammatory state back into quiet. Now, if you have repetitive head trauma or repetitive insults, whatever it is, traumatic or non-traumatic, it keeps the inflammation going. So you go from an acute reactive phase to a chronic reactive phase. And these chronic phases we've found greater than 17 years. And how do we know?
Wow.
By these cytokines, cytokine 6, interleukin 6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha. 17 plus years down the road, you're finding these elevated levels, which tells us what? That you've had chronic inflammation. That's why it can take years before you develop that depression that takes you to your doc, and the doc never asks you, how many car accidents did you have? Or when did you fall off that building? Or how many times have you had assaulted? Or you were with the Canadian Police Department, mounted police, and fell off your horse a couple of times, not drinking anything.
Drinking that Canadian maple syrup or something like that.
Canadian maple syrup, that'll do it. I love the Canadian maple syrup. That's great stuff. And so what happens is the immune system in the brain is responsible for this. And let me throw in one side thing. 11 years ago, they found another chemical called fractalkine. It's a chemokine. It's also produced by the cells in the brain. And fractalkine is produced by the neurons. And it tells the microglia cells to stay chilled, stay calm, don't become activated. But what causes the fractalkine to drop that allows for the microglia to become excited, inflammatory, acute phase? Stress. So this is how you can have chronic stress, no physical trauma, just stress, living in a stressful environment as a kid, living in a stressful environment, or as a soldier being out in the field of battle, never actually getting into a firefight or never exposed to anything personally, but having to deal with it, or being, a corpsman or a medic where you're dealing with people who had lost their lives. That's why we had Memorial Day yesterday.
Right.
So the stress of chronic stress of that causes fractalkine to drop, allowing the white blood cells to activate and start dumping these cytokines. So the exact same chemical milieu that's generated from an IED, car accident, motorcycle crash, being hit on this head, sliding off your snowboard or your skis down a hill, thump, 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 thump down the hill. All these things cause the same kind of inflammation. The pathway, the trigger might be different, but the end results are all the same. And it's that needs to be addressed. And then in 1982, we found Dr. Bailou out of Paris, France. He found that in the brain, we produce the same hormones by the glial cells in the brain, the astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, the microglia, and the neurons. We produce the same hormones as gonads do, as the adrenals do, as the thyroid does, yes. Because he found the same enzymatic pathways in the brain. So oligodendrocytes and astrocytes all make testosterone. Astrocytes make T3, thyroid 3, triiodothyronine. So when you have inflammation in the brain from a trauma, all those hormones in the brain get shut down. Why? Because the clear pathway to generate these metabolites from cholesterol are interrupted. They're interrupted because the chemistry's changed. And this thing called peroxynitrite that's made from reactive oxygen species, which is free radicals. Free radicals connect to nitric oxide, which dilates blood vessels, and it hooks up together and makes another chemical, peroxynitrite. What does that do? Damages DNA, damages mRNA, damages protein synthesis, damages enzymes, damages ribosomes, damages molecular chemical pathways, damages cell membrane pathway like the gated ion channels, which allow for sodium chloride, potassium to go in and out of the cell to generate a nerve conduction, which is how we think from one part of the brain to another or communicate one part to another. So all the chemistry goes from being a neuropermissive, where it allows nerves to function healthily, to a non-neuropermissive environment, which is inflammatory. And everything shuts down. And that's how you develop depression, anxiety, bipolar, ALS, MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. They're all related. And now the literature is clearly talking about inflammation and multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. On the Joe Rogan program, the last one in January, I talked about our gal who flies in from Sweden, who had moderate to severe Parkinson's. In 90 days, she's 70% better. Or the 3 patients with Alzheimer's who got better. They were, 2 of them were non-patients. They got onto our treatment protocol, which is available to anyone, through our website. And it addresses inflammation, mitochondrial functioning, and clearing out the cobwebs or the chemistry, so that from a non-neuropermissive to a neuropermissive. And so we're doing programs right now, group studies on using just our 3 key products, our core products, and how they are influencing 48 to be accurate, 48 Marines. And the results have been quite impressive. Okay.
That's incredible. I mean, no pharmaceutical company wants there to be any sort of universal way to treat the brain. I mean, like if you start telling people that, MS and the pathophysiology for MS or Parkinson's or, any of these conditions could actually all be supported in a very similar kind of way with these, with the same chronic, inflammatory state. I mean, this is not information they want to be shared, do they?
Well, I would hope so. And so we can develop an association, a partnership, so we can use our products with their products and, hopefully taper off their products sooner than long term. And if you look at our PDR, the physician desk reference, on any of the antidepressant drugs, it says for short-term use. So why are people on it for 20 years?
Yeah, it's so important, I think, for people to just recognize that, this, and I love the way you spelled out the pathophysiology, this chronic, glial activation, this non-resolve that's happening in that phase 2. That's critical. And this fractalkin, I mean, I've never heard this before. I mean, clearly you're a man who dives deep in the literature to find these important molecules. Yeah.
I'm at the molecular. If you need any of the articles, just send me what you want. We'll flip you around. And the only way that I'm able to influence people is not necessarily by the outcome of what I do, which eventually will become important, but it's the science that supports everything I do. I mean, I'm not smart enough to just come up and make this stuff up. What has happened is I love reading, and I love reading science. Instead of reading science fiction, space travel and all that I grew up on, I'm looking at another form of travel, to travel down the science highway of what has already been done and how we can apply it. I do translational medicine. There's the science from the bench, which is the research, tons of it, incredible amounts of it that no one's reading. What I do is I read that. That's what I spend my days doing, is reading this science that's already been done by researchers. And I take it, see how I can apply it in the clinical application. That's translational medicine. You take from the bench to the bedside. So that's what we've worked on. Our key product took 16 years to develop, Brain Care 2, which is responsible now for squelching inflammation and also recently helping guys with ringing in their ears, the tinnitus. And this is our military. I only deal with military. And my daughter, the naturopath, deals with all the civilians. And yes, they have the same thing as a lot of the military, but causation or precipitating cause is totally different.
Yeah.
But they have the exact same things.
Mm-hmm.
Symptomatology.
That's incredible. I know we're getting close to time to close out, but I do want to ask, just with this constant innovation towards optimization, and have you found there to be any role for, let's say, neurofeedback or photobiomodulation, or sunlight up the nostrils? After you started talking about even the hormone production in the glial cells, I was thinking of, what about intranasal testosterone or thyroid hormone or what have you? But so, like, what does the future of this look like? Or is there a role for some of these hacks for the brain?
I believe that things like HBOT, QEED, feedback, phototherapy at 440 or 420 nanometers, red light, I think they all have a function. And what I do is I go and look at the deep dive into the molecular way of which it works. The light cures the inflammatory cytokines. And I know that from a project I did in Australia and Thailand with stem cells and with PRP, that these inflammatory cytokines are destroyed with certain wavelengths of light. And it's in the red spectrum. So I know that that's how it works. QEED with the biofeedback, I know that it works, but it doesn't work well if you've got inflammation of the brain. Yeah. So on my website, I was a keynote speaker for the International Society of Neurofeedback and Research, and basically laid out the foundation of how hormones help to reestablish the ability of things like HBOT and biofeedback to work better. So I don't negate any of these modalities. I mean, if that's what's available to you, you should use it. Someone like Sean Dollar, I know he's talked about it, used a lot of HBOT, and it worked extremely well until the point where it stopped working.
Yeah.
And then getting him on to, a protocol that addresses how to get things better. And he's been doing great.
That's amazing.
Absolutely great. Andrew went back to school, got his MBA. He's now working for this huge company. He's running his Warrior Angel Foundation, which is waftbi.org, which is the military. I started working with the military in the United Kingdom. I've had a couple of military from Canada, from Israel, from France, from Germany. Wherever they're coming from, it's fine with me. And it's really about finding competent healthcare providers in each one of these countries to get trained and learn. And as I said, I'm inviting you, come and take the class in November. Okay?
That's amazing. Our borders should be open by then. I'm down there. It'll be my birthday present.
Oh, when's your birthday?
The 5th.
November 5th?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, somewhere around there.
And guess what? My class is November 5th.
Oh, amazing. I'll be there.
You'll be there. Fine. I'll buy the scotch.
Yeah, I love it. One of the things I was thinking of as you're speaking to, there's a massive aspect to drug use and addiction, post-traumatic brain injury, and just living in this modern world we live in. I work a lot in the addiction space as well. We have a recovery program where we use NAD IVs and all sorts of other things. We use our longevity lab, which has the hyperbaric and all that. And this information that you're sharing right now is so applicable to those communities and those people who are, working the steps, doing all the things from that mental, emotional point of view, the spiritual point of view, which are so important. And I absolutely trust that there's a really important process. And this whole metabolic process that you're speaking to, this neuroendocrine process, is so unfortunately misunderstood, and it needs to be applied to them as well. Yep. I just want to make that as a statement, but any thoughts?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. I usually leave it for, another day. Yeah. The two issues, new segment in my lecture from last year was how the use of opioids and narcotics actually make your chances of getting off of them more difficult. We found that when you use narcotics, they shut down the perception of pain. Everyone should know that narcotics, opioids do not do anything directly for pain. They make you think the pain's not there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, what we found is that by using opioids, they cross-talk with another receptor, which we call the toll-like 4 receptor, which actually increases inflammation. So you're taking the narcotic to make you think the inflammation doesn't matter while you're building up more inflammation, and then you have breakthrough pain because the inflammation has now exceeded the ability of the opioid narcotic to diminish your perception of pain. So how we've gotten people off of methadone, Oxycontin, Lortab, hydroxychloroquine, codeine, all these things, marijuana, alcohol, cigarette smoking, is in our protocol. When you correct the brain's chemistry, the brain says, I don't need smoking anymore. I'm feeling great. I don't need alcohol anymore. I'm feeling great. I don't need chewing tobacco. I don't need blah, 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 blah. I've got a patient, a civilian, who admitted he was smoking marijuana. Here, it's legal in California. He was smoking marijuana 3 times a day for 35 years. 6 months into his program, he wakes up, doesn't see the need to smoke weed again. We have a military guy who was put on methadone because he was on 240 tablets of Lortab, 5 milligrams of hydroxycodone. And the doctor in the VA said, 8 a day times 30 days is 240. Let's put you on methadone, 1 tablet a day, I think it was. So 9 months into his program, he wakes up, doesn't need it. Okay, so we've seen withdrawal, we've seen improvement in addiction personality. It's about the brain trying to help the brain telling you to try different things because it's looking for an answer. It's looking for what will stop it feeling so bad.
Wow. Yeah, and again, just to reiterate just how important that is, especially right now. And then we talked about the current crisis where the sheer amount of people, they're diving back into their habits and what feels sort of normal or as a way to escape or distract from that healing. And we got to dive in. We got to learn how to heal that brain from the inside out. Dr. Mark Gordon, thank you so much for everything you shared today. I want to make sure that there's people in the U.S., there's people in Canada, internationally. They're going to want to find more about the things that you share. And so you've got the website, www.tbihelpnow.org.
Right.
If you want to get access to the tri-pack and then some of the tools to utilize for cellular healing in the brain, you got the store on there. Any other resources? I mean, check out the documentary.
More on the educational side is the DHPUSA.com. Okay. DHPUSA.com. Dynamic Health Products, DHPUSA.com. It was my daughter's company. We incorporated it into Millennium Health Centers. It's education. So there are 3 key educational sites. And the primary one, tbihelpnow.org, we keep on adding more and more information. You can go to the science and download articles, or you can go to the media and get information that are programs like yours will be on there. Our present communication will be on there. Some of Joe Rogan's things on Mike Maller, who did a 2-hour-long why it's important that males have estrogen. Some of the other programs are on there too. It's very important that males have estrogen. And then information about the software package that is available. We've got, I think, 3 clinics in Canada utilizing this software package. It's on trial for them, which allows a healthcare provider to function on the level that I'm functioning on within 15 minutes.
Oh, that's incredible. I mean, you're such a gift to practitioners, obviously to the civilians and our veterans, and the sheer amount of hours you've put into this research to make this applicable and usable and understandable for people is, we're all just tremendously grateful, those who get a chance to connect with you and learn from you. So I look forward to celebrating my birthday down in Texas with you and come November.
Yeah, Dallas, Texas.
That's it.
That's it. That's the place to bite.
We always leave the call with one little maybe piece of homework or home play assignment for people to connect with.
Right.
What's one thing that you might recommend for people to just kind of get started on this, investigation or this maybe baby steps into the protocol, so they can start to learn some of this stuff?
Great question. And one of my new responses for that question is about self-reflection. If there are people out there that are taking certain medications to help them with mood and so forth, to look into your past, talk to your family members about any kind of trauma, because a lot of people live in denial. A lot of people live in not only denial, but they downplay things. Yeah, I was in 3 car accidents, but I didn't lose consciousness. But look back, and again, 10 Canadian dimes equals $1 Canadian. Okay, so to look back, and that's really the key. Reassess your origin to now, whatever age you are. And if you're on medication for mood disorder or something of that, look and see, because you might find that these have been missed. And then asking your doctor. I know Health Canada may not do anything, and you don't have 2 of our tests in Canada, which blows my mind. DHT and what's the other? Estrone and DHT.
Right.
Just crazy. And that's really do it. Start your own investigation on yourself and then read.
I love that advice. I mean, we often tell people to go back to your health timeline and start to put together some of these principles, or not even principles, just investigations as you're calling them. And I love that advice. And if we all just took a little time, turn off the news, right? Turn off the news,
right?
Spend a little time reflecting, journaling. What was it like growing up? Were there some traumas there, and start putting those pieces of that puzzle together. I love that you shared that. That's absolutely brilliant. So again, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. It's such a pleasure to connect with you. And for all those practitioners that are out there that are wanting to help more people, I mean, make sure you reach out to the website to learn more. If you're a patient or you're someone who's struggling, like most of us are, with some degree of brain trauma and or these lingering symptoms that he spoke about, make sure you check out his book. And the name of the book again, Dr. Mark?
The one is called TBI, A Clinical Approach to Diagnosis and Treatment. It's on the website.
That's the 2015 one, right?
That's 2015. The one that's anti-aging or interventional endocrinology is 2007.
Perfect. So there you go. There's some resources to get started on too. Signing off. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Dr. Dads and share with your family and friends. You can also follow and interact with Dr. Nick and Dr. David on Facebook and Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration and the latest in health and wellness. Be well.